Welcome to the 0400 Podcast, the podcast for dreamers. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We have a really, really special day today. We have our first guest on the podcast, one of my best friends in the whole world, and just a really interesting guy with a great story, Miles Kirby. Glad you're here, man.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for waking up at 3:30 a.m. to get here, and it's going to be great. It's going to be great.
Yeah, man. Welcome.
For all you guys tuning in, you can find us on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We also have an Instagram and a TikTok where we post little clips from our podcast. So go check us out there. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review, please, or subscribe to those channels. We're going to hop into it this morning, right?
Let's do it.
What are we drinking today, Jake?
I don't remember.
There we go. It's a blend.
Yeah.
Hanes blend.
Oh, I think we should also, mention that we're doing like a little remote little breakout today.
So, yeah, we're here at Profectus Columbia, which is where I work and train jiu-jitsu with Miles Kirby over here. It's a really cool space, and we thought we'd bring the podcast to Miles rather than making him drive 45 minutes.
Cool space.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I think it's going to look good with the mats in the background.
And I appreciate you guys not making me drive.
Yes, absolutely. Cool. So I guess we just hop on into this. Miles, I'd love to hear sort of just as much as you want to share about your story, how you got here to Profectus Columbia, but also like your journey through jiu-jitsu, your journey into coaching, just whatever you got, man.
Yeah, well, I guess the journey kind of started around, I forgot exactly what year it was. I think it was 2011. Typical story, bullied kid, just a touch of traumatic, traumatized in childhood, like most of us. And so as you know, through that process, you develop really bad mindsets. And where I'm from, fighting was just kind of what you did on the weekends. And that typically creates these really cyclical cycles, especially for young adults, because there's really no outlet where I'm from, like any healthy outlet for anything, honestly. So barring church, So whenever I found training, I initially found kickboxing at my local YMCA, and there was like this Taekwondo guy that basically he would beat the crap out of me every day. I would go in there and train. So, and that just kind of tipped me over for this journey. And eventually I found actually jiu-jitsu in Jackson, Tennessee under Ashley Wheat. And that's actually was my connection to Jeremy, my professor. So through that, going through, getting in a lot of trouble, being a wild-ass 20-year-old, I got to this pivot point in life like most of us do that go down that journey. And that was whenever I decided that I was going to be a pro fighter or whatever. So, because I was saving up my money to go to Thailand. And this is kind of a summarized version, and we can get off into the weeds too. But I met Jeremy, and he was like, well, if you're being serious, he was like, you can just live in my house. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So I just gave up my career. I had the career job, packed all my stuff up in my car, and moved to Nashville. And that's really where it all started, was living at the fighter house for 3 or 4 years and training full-time and all that stuff. So, and then, 8 years, I think I've been in Nashville for 8 or 9 years now. And, man, there's been a lot of life lived in those 8 or 9 years. Oh, yeah. I was talking to somebody that trains here yesterday, and and it's really hard to sum up those moments because there's so much time, in your training. And I think especially for people who are just starting, they don't realize that, it's not something that happens over a year time span. It's like it's a decade of time before you even like pierce the veil of what's happening here. And I think that is kind of disjointed and goes throughout many facets of life, right? Because especially with the way the modern society is with, Instagram and the whole social media stuff, it's everything you see is like get rich quick or get yourself healthy quick or whatever, but you see everybody at the top, but you don't see the guy, in the closet eating out of a dumpster, nobody gives a shit about them.
Right.
But, they don't care about them until they reach that pinnacle of quote unquote success, So, but, and I was thinking about this last night because my mind was racing about being on here last night. And I was just like, what are we going to talk about, And what it boils down to, the person in the closet, it's really interesting. And I kind of use that as my own, personal experience because I lived in a closet for a long time.
I've got a funny story about that I'll tell.
An actual closet.
Yeah.
Like a room.
Yeah, I lived in a mop closet for over a year while I was training jiu-jitsu. Wow. Because I didn't, I lived in Cool Springs at the time. And obviously we all know the price of rent in Cool Springs. And so in order to dedicate yourself and have the right amount of time to train and be competitive, well, you can't have a job, not at least one that pays well. So that was kind of like that sacrifice. And during that period of, I call it turmoil in my life, that was like a good recentering for me. Was to, live in the gym, dedicate myself back to jiu-jitsu, and then, just kind of move forward from there.
Like a nomad.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. It's like you truly minimalist, you just you pack up and go anywhere.
So the mop closet, were you, and we can move on from this point, but I'm curious because I got this image in my head.
Yeah.
Were you able to lie down flat?
Yes.
Did you have to curl up?
No. So what was interesting was I had a tri-fold twin size mattress that I could fold up like right next to the sink, but it was just big enough for a twin size mattress, and I could shut the door, and that was it.
So I got to tell the story before we move on because this is amazing. So I had met Miles a couple times before I started training. But so he was really the only person I knew at Profectus, and I just had talked to him a couple times. But I had joined and I came to my first morning class, and this was probably like a Monday morning or something. And the morning class was at 6 a.m. And so I didn't have my own gi yet. And so I got into the gym, and Brian was like, yeah, the gis are in that closet right over there. Go grab whatever one fits you. And so I walk over there, open the door, and there's Miles asleep on the floor. He's like, grab whatever you need. And so I'm stepping over Miles and grabbing gis and belts, and then I close the door. Good night.
Yep.
But always around like 6:45 or 7, he would roll out of the closet and come, and he'd walk through what we were working on, and he'd give pointers and stuff. It was pretty cool. But that was a nice surprise that morning. I was like, oh my gosh, there's a person in this mop closet.
That makes it such a good story, like those little moments that color it. So.
Oh yeah, it was a lot of fun, and to me, and talking about being a nomad, I had a little 4-door Colorado at the time that I had gutted the back seats and built a platform, and I had my whole closet back there.
Nice.
So, and yeah, it was fun. I mean, especially with modern, I did it twice. I broke from modern society, quote unquote, twice from actual material things, and those are the most freeing times for me. Was one whenever I first moved up here. Because a part of that before I moved here, it was, get a job, get your career, get that going, which I did, and then I bought the house and I bought the truck. And
what was the career, out of curiosity, that you went into?
So I was a machinist
for
a long time. So I basically went to trade school, went through that whole thing. I actually graduated trade school before I would have finished high school. And so I started in the workforce right at 18, making tons of money for where I was living and the age I was. So of course, I just bought everything and, went down the rabbit hole of buy me this for happiness. And, obviously it doesn't work.
You got the boat, right?
Yeah, I got the boat.
Yeah.
I had the boat, I had the house, and it was just like, you buy your way into happiness that happens for just a brief period of time. Then, you toss it in the corner. And during that period of my life, I call it like the dark period. That was whenever I was hyper insecure basically about everything in life, right? Because I was, from all the things that had happened, partying all the time, that was like at the height of my wild stage of life, which was a lot of fun. And I don't regret any of it because we had a blast. But still, at the end of the day, the more, weed you smoke, and then the more you drink every weekend, and you just keep packing all that stuff down, like it just, it all comes out, in a lot of unhealthy ways. And that's where we kind of get to that pivot point that I came to, where you can either keep going down the rabbit hole, or here's this opportunity that you say you've been wanting, and then here you go. You can go and you can actually change your life and do something different. Because I always found, you know, we talked about it before the podcast, that I come from a really small town, and the inherent flaw with small towns are whenever you grow up, you know, through the societal structures or whatever you want to call it, like everybody clumps together. You know, you got your group here, group there. And the problem in small towns is, depending on which group you're in, you're never able to get out, even throughout. You know, the more you grow, even if you're in like the wild bunch and then you go to the church bunch or whatever, like the church bunch is not going to let you in most of the time.
Right.
You know, now they might whenever you're in your 30s, maybe, right? Because everybody grows and all that stuff until that point. But you're going to be stuck in that same rut.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think it's important that people that are in those ruts, you know, get out if they can.
You were saying your town, the population was around 6,000?
Yeah, I think between 6 and 10.
At that time. So that's pretty small.
Oh, yeah.
As far as towns go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Because, like, small towns are kind of how probably most people live forever.
Oh, yeah.
But they are so claustrophobic, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Like, my dad has never left.
Yeah.
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 You know?
Now, when you talk about living in the closet in the gym, I feel like with any entrepreneur's story that's good or athlete, it's like something like that where they're just, you know, at their lowest point or what they consider, or maybe most minimalist, maybe not even lowest. But yeah, I know you said kind of your darkest. What do you look back on that with like fondness? Because I feel like the common theme is, even though it was hard and it was not ideal, most people look back on that and they're like, that was some of the best times of my life.
If I wasn't married currently, I would be living here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like, it wouldn't be, you know, I chose to do that. You know, I mean, obviously we all have choices, and that's something that I chose, because I actually went up, there's this group, it's Pedigo Submission Fighting, and they live in Mount Vernon, and it's a whole group of them. And they are some wild guys up there. Now, they're awesome, though. I'm pretty good friends with all of them. And I went up there and stayed with them for like a couple weeks for a World's Camp one time. I think it was in 2017. But yeah, you know, it's just a bunch of dudes that just, like, all they did was they just slept on the mats every night. And I was like, okay.
That's amazing.
Shared everything.
Yeah, shared everything. Like, it was just, everything was communal. Like, food, gis, everything.
Like, fighting has become all-consuming.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of like anything with mastery or
Right.
whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
I think at some point, especially for men, I mean, I think anybody, not just men, but you need to give yourself to something that's not really tangible, you know, for a certain period of time. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that's kind of lost, is, you know, that development of mastery and actually succumbing to whatever it is you want to master.
Yeah, sacrifice. It's like, we touched on this last week, but, you know, we have this weird concept in the modern world that we're supposed to be as comfortable as possible, you know?
Oh, yeah.
That we need the house, we need the whatever it is, and if we just get that next thing, we're going to be happy. But the reality is, you know, I feel like everyone, and I think especially men, I think we need something that is so challenging to us that it almost breaks us open, that we can overcome, you know? And that was jiu-jitsu for me too. Mm-hmm. I found jiu-jitsu at a time in my life when I needed something to just rip me open. And it became that really quickly, in a good way. It's like the breaking. It's like kind of like the calcification of bones in kickboxing, right? You kick something over and over and over, you're literally damaging your bone. But what happens is that calcium comes in and makes them stronger and harder than they were before. That's what jiu-jitsu was for me, emotionally, man, spiritually, physically, mentally. It was all of that thing, all of it wrapped up. So I totally understand for someone who wanted to be a pro fighter to have that sort of stoic or ascetic lifestyle where you live in the closet. It's all about getting out there and mastering something and working as hard as you can. That's pretty cool. Like, it makes me want to do that, you know? Yeah. It makes me want to come live on the mats.
Yeah, you know, and it's kind of the same thing, you know, and it's a common theme across jiu-jitsu, you know, and people talk about it all the time, but you can't hide on the mats, right? And you can't hide from yourself either, you know, and that's also why the attrition rate is so high in jiu-jitsu, right? People come in, you know, they think they're going to be this, they think they're going to be that, and then all of a sudden they get an actual real-time view of themselves most of the time. And it takes about 3 to 6 months, like, because that's whenever you're like, okay, I've been doing this a while, the news worn off, and you really try, and you can't hide. And then that's typically when people quit or they push through. So yeah.
Let me introduce you to something called not being able to breathe.
Yeah.
There you go. Have fun. I remember.
Here, lay down. Spencer's going to sit on top of you and try to choke you out. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
So you were saying, who was it? Was it Malcolm Gladwell that did the 10,000 hour thing?
I think so. Yeah.
But you're saying to even scratch the surface into the whatever jiu-jitsu is, and that that world teaches you. You said it's 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I think I got promoted to black belt. I made to black belt in, I think, 9 years.
Wow.
And I'm just scratching the surface on this stuff. I think they came up with the 10,000 hours to make people feel good.
Yeah.
I think it's at least 20.
It's a good round number. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's obvious dedication, right? I mean, that's a certain level of obsession. And I use that word like with all respect. Obsession is good, focus and all that. Oh, by the way, I got a little thing to share about focus. But anyway, so seeing that dedication and seeing you day after day showing up and climbing the ladder of the belt system, you get to black belt. And now, you feel like even that was just scratching the surface. So I would be curious to know, we've talked a little bit about how, in my limited experience with jiu-jitsu, I know both y'all are doing jiu-jitsu. We talk a lot about how the idea, in life existentially, suffering is kind of that doorway to heaven. It's like the doorway to enlightenment. And it works best when it's chosen. Like when it's like necessary suffering that's been chosen, meaning like I didn't choose to have it, but now that it's here, I'm choosing to endure it and carry it well. And that when we do that suffering refines us. It shows us who we are. It's like these initiation rites of like boys throughout all of time, except for our culture for some reason. It would always involve a ceremony that involved like a ritualistic pain that every man in the tribe has endured before. So we used the example before of like the tribe that knocks out a tooth with a stick and a rock.
Oh, yeah.
And every man in the tribe has that same missing tooth. And so the idea of the pain, the suffering, like all the men in the tribe who have already been tested and refined in the fire and the trials of life, they're all kind of leaning in because like, all right, this kid's about to get some serious pain. Let's see who he is. Let's see how he reacts. And so I guess long-winded, but my question is for you, doing this for 10 years, just now scratching the surface, what has jiu-jitsu taught you about you? Like when you saw yourself, I would imagine just perpetually in deeper ways, who do you see? And like, what has the mechanism of jiu-jitsu that's only now scratching the surface? What has it revealed in you?
If I could sum it up in one word, it would be management.
Management.
Yeah. Because for several years, like most people through their 20s is a weird time in their life. Your brain's still not fully developed most of the time. You got a lot of things you're working on. You got a lot of things you're working out from childhood. You can do the sob story of, the victim mentality. There's all kinds of things that can happen. But it boils down to me management. It was all about me learning how to manage myself through this whole process. And a part of the suffering is I think, or going back to it, is what the suffering does is allows you to have some semblance of control that's, I don't believe, is kind of real. Because you are putting yourself in this position of suffering, right? That you're learning how to control, that you're really not learning how to control it, you're just learning how to manage it, right? So by you understanding management of suffering that you're controlling, it helps you manage the suffering you can't control.
Wow.
So that's kind of where I've been all this time, coming from, an irrational, insecure person to kind of seeing how ridiculous that was, but it's very real at the time.
Oh yeah.
And I was, it's funny. I was thinking,
it feels real, doesn't it?
Oh, 100%. I mean, whether the emotion or the thought is, absurd or it's truthful, it's still the same. Because if you view yourself in a negative way, you view yourself as negative, and it's the same thing as positive. So, a part of the process of managing your negative side, positive side, and all of it, it's all one. It seems like one cohesive little place that you're in, right? Because you can't get outside of your own head. So, but if you can understand how to manage yourself in the most irrational of times, you're going to have a much better time whenever you can actually step outside yourself and view you for what you really are versus what you really think you are. Yeah. So, and Spencer actually came up with this, and I talk about the puzzle that you put together of life. Or Spencer's talked about it as like the anchor. Going back to jiu-jitsu and that suffering piece, which I find is extremely interesting, right? Because you never know more about yourself than whenever you feel like you're about to die. David Goggins talks about like the 40% rule or whatever, where we're only, like, you might be given 40% of what you can actually do. But once you break through that threshold, that's where you start realizing your mortality. That's where you really start breaking down those walls of, insecurity, irrationality. And Spencer and I talk a lot about jiu-jitsu was that anchor for us for life. And, a part of that refinement, going from being a child to a man, or from, a girl to a woman, is, if we put ourselves in this piece of suffering, well, if you put yourself in a place of suffering, you need to have an anchor to something in that suffering that tethers you to reality. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's what jiu-jitsu did for me. I know Spencer shared with me that's what it did for him in his point in life, is because whenever you're going from in that weird stage of irrationality, insecurity, I'm just using that because that was most relevant in my life, right? By me going through the walk and the path of jiu-jitsu, it allowed me to play with several different ways of living. It allowed me to play with several different ways of being, several different personalities, and figuring out which one of those that I was going to enjoy for myself. Because the whole goal for me was, so obviously, everybody on the outside was, oh, this kid, he wants to be a world champion. He wants to be great at jiu-jitsu, obviously. When at the end of the day, I was just trying to care about myself because I couldn't. Like, I hated myself, didn't like, I remember there was a time, I think it's probably between 21 and 22, like I didn't look in the mirror, like I would brush my teeth with my head down because I couldn't look at myself. So a part of my entire journey was me just trying to figure out and try to be somebody that I would enjoy being. And whenever you go through that type of change, you need anchors. Oh, yeah. You need a place to be. And I talk about the mats as like a blank canvas for anybody who comes in, because there's so many different people that walk in that have, they want something different out of it. You've got the person who's their life is squared away, but they just want to get in shape. You got the person who has traumatic childhood traumas that got addicted to drugs, and they're trying to just come in and be around community. I mean, you just pick something out of a hat and it's here, But the cool part is there's space for all of it, because of the community. And I talk about it a lot, and that's another thing that's been lost. And I think it was lost even before COVID, is this community piece. Because as I was going through my little journey and in Brentwood, was what held me together, truly what my anchor was all of my training partners, like all the people that would come in whenever I was like really down on myself. And I talked about this in my purple belt speech. I would be dying on the inside, and then I would come in and I'd be sitting on the wall, and then, like my buddy Hunt, he would come over and he would just crack me up. He would make me laugh. And it was like in a time where it was like, I'm not laughing. Mm-hmm. Like, and I just couldn't help it.
Everybody needs a Hunt in their life.
Yeah.
Great name, by the way.
It's a good name.
Did you hear that, babe? Hunt.
Yeah. And he's also a hunter. Big time hunter.
Of course.
So, it matches, it fits.
Oh, yeah.
All dreamers are hunters, really.
Yeah.
So at one point, you're talking about in your story how you just wanted to be a fighter. And now becoming a gym owner, when did that all change to where there's kind of like that perspective shift of, okay, this is different. I want jiu-jitsu for a different reason now?
Well, so what's funny is around blue belt was whenever I knew that was the end goal. Like, ever since blue belt, I was like, I'm going to have my own gym one day. So we talk about goal setting, and you have to have those like little tangible goals along the way, because you're a blue belt that's been training for 2 years, and it's like, oh yeah, I want to like have a school and be a coach and all that stuff, man. Well, it's the same thing, man. That's 8 years of time. Like, man,
you could be a doctor.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, easily.
A lot of people go to college for 8 years, Tommy.
Yeah, and so.
Sorry, Tommy boy, y'all.
Totally.
Jeez Louise, I'm getting too old, man. Sorry. No more 90s movies.
Yeah.
All right, more 90s movies.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
But, with that, yeah, that was kind of always the goal, was to have school, because I've realized that piece of, and I talk about it sometimes where I feel like I owe a debt for what jiu-jitsu did for me. And it's not a debt that I can pay back with money. It's not a debt. Believe me, I've tried to come up with several different ways that trying to figure out how to repay this debt.
Neon geese.
Hey, I've got some kids that would have loved that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Like bright yellow.
Yeah. And so with that, it was the only way that I can pay it back is create a space for other people like somebody created for me. And so that's what this place is for me. It's just my blank slate that I'm giving to everybody to come in and be whatever they want to be.
Come on, dude.
So
amazing.
I love that, man. I love that since blue belt, you knew this was the end goal. This was the dream. And you're living your dream now, man. You've got a place of your own.
Yeah.
In an awesome town. And I mean, I think I've touched on this a little bit in the podcast, but there's just something special about this place and the people in it. I'm glad we're doing a podcast here, so the people at home can see, like, this place is like a chapel in a sense. Like, people come in here, they're doing work, they're like transcending themselves. They're
people are transforming right there.
Oh, they're transforming right there.
Character is being refined right here.
Kids are coming alive for the first time, in the sense, like, you have these kids that come in that have just been so clearly traumatized, and they get out there and they're making friends, and they're learning what it means to sacrifice and to suffer a little bit, but they're laughing and they're smiling and they're training hard, and then they go out there and compete and they win, or they lose gracefully, in a sense, like they lose with character, which is, I think, even more important. And they're all learning that right here from this guy.
Yeah,
and it's just so cool, man.
Yeah.
It's been cool watching you coach.
Especially in the era of participation trophies, like, because then the wins that actually happen, they're real wins. You can't fake your way to it,
No, and there's a delicate balance with it all in the actual structure of the program, right? I mean, you can't allow a child to lose every single time. Now, obviously, you can't give them a trophy, but you've got to find something where they can win. Because, it's not like, kids are not like adults where we can take and even with most adults, like, if you come in and try to do something new and you just get berated and you just lose every single time, it's like you're not going to develop any type of confidence, and that's kind of what all your structure should be around, is just building confidence, right? On and off the mat. So even with children, you get some kid in here that's obviously not athletic. It's like your job as a coach, you have to find some little niche thing for that child where they can go home with a win that day.
Because isn't that part of the point and strategy of what makes jiu-jitsu so interesting and magical? Is athleticism is great. Obviously, it's going to help you. It's an athletic sport, but it could also be like a particular way you twist somebody's ankle or something. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Like the little kid that is not athletic can be empowered, can taste victory.
Oh, absolutely.
I once asked my coach at the time, Brian, if tickling was allowed. Because that was kind of like, that's an obvious strategy to me. Just tickle, tickle, tickle. And anyway, nobody thought it was funny. So I was like, funny. Okay, all right. I'm just kind of, I Homer Simpsoned back into the bush.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, Jeremy tickles me sometimes.
I believe it. I believe it.
I mean, is that outlawed? I mean, that seems like an obvious strategy.
I don't think it's outlawed, but when you're in a hard roll, your sensors are focused elsewhere.
I guess trying to see Maximus in the Colosseum, like tickling Commodus, it does kind of take away some of the glory, I guess.
Just a tad.
So did I hear you say that you're married now?
I am.
And so...
also to a Sydney.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So hearing some of your story, so we have these 3 questions that we like to explore in the podcast in 0400, and it's who are you, what do you want, and where are you going? And the idea is if you could stop anybody on the street and just stop them, pause them in their tracks, and just ask them 3 questions where you could get the most information out of them, that's helpful. Those are the 3 questions that we've come up with. So who are you, what do you want, and where are you going? And so hearing a little bit about your story, I've heard a bit about where you're coming from. I've heard about where you are now. I've heard about many of the things that you do want, the blank canvas and giving back and kind of planting. We talked about this idea of planting trees by which you'll never be shaded, that kind of thing. And what would you say, like when in that process of getting into a lot of fights growing up, having to scrap, being bullied, having to, it's like almost like a necessary desperation to find how to be empowered, which everybody needs. And so in all of that, when did you realize that you were a dreamer?
That's a good question. Probably when I moved to Nashville.
Okay.
And
like, so the closet.
Well, so the closet came like 5 years after I
gotcha.
moved. So initially I was living in my Professor Jeremy's house with like 4 other fighters. And so that was the closet portion came, I think I was 27 maybe. I was in my mid-20s. I'd been here training 5 or 6 years before I jumped in the closet. But still, even though, the fighter house, I lived in the attic with no AC in the summer and like
In Tennessee,
It's
ridiculous.
So like, it was like, I was bare ass on the sheets every night with 3 or 4 fans on me, So yeah, that was suffering too, I guess.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. It was a lot of fun. It was just a wild time.
So that was when you started feeling like the butterflies, like seeing the horizon begin to lighten up in your world. Like oh my gosh, like not only do I want to be here, but I can see where I'm going now.
Yeah, I finally had a direction. I had a path that I wanted to be on.
Yeah.
For most everybody, I think as you grow up, and it's only because your parents love you and want the best for you, but they put you on a path that is really good. Hopefully, like, there's a lot of good morals and values and all that stuff, but, they want you to be an engineer. They want you to go and be a nurse or whatever it is. They want you to go down this path of life that's, comfortable, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, and I attribute my mom, she has pushed me more than anybody in my life because she's the one that pushed me out of the house whenever I got the opportunity. And I'm super grateful for that because I came home and told her about it. She was like, oh, well, you're going to quit Monday? And I was like, well, I have to put in my 2-week notice. But she was like, oh, yeah, that's right. You do have to do that. So I feel very fortunate in regards to my mother is also a dreamer. And she has taught me from a very, very early age that she's been pushing me out of the nest my whole life.
So good.
Let's focus on that. How did you know your mom was a dreamer? Or what are the qualities that you've always seen growing up surrounding your mom that made it clear, oh, she's a dreamer?
Well, she makes a lot of things happen. So my mom, she was a school teacher for a long time, and now she's the director over a child abuse center. She has been for about 30 years. And so a part of whenever I say like she's a dreamer, there's a lot of factors that go into that, but a lot of it is like she never stopped moving. Like my whole childhood, we were on the road all the time going to baseball, and a part of her, and of course, obviously she's my mother, and, and I reflect back and I look on all those times where, obviously my mother, I'm trying to come up with that kind of thing where, like, what was it that, makes her a dreamer?
But maybe it was just all the little actions, right?
It's all the little actions, and really her dream was for me. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think that's what a lot of people take for granted, you know, is like whenever you come into this world, and I don't know if you have a child, right?
2.
Do you have a child?
I've got one.
Okay. So I'm sure I don't have a child yet, so I don't know. But from what I've seen, it's like your whole life perspective changes whenever that happens. And you're a part of at least 50% of your whole being is making sure they're alive and that they're okay, you know? And so for my mother, that's, as I've been an adult, that's what I noticed is she started dreaming for me, right? That was her dream. Her dream was for me. It wasn't for her anymore. So everything that she did in my life helped push me into what my dream was.
Yeah.
So I guess that was the answer that I was looking for.
That's beautiful, man.
So
That's great. So I think another point there that's really impressive is that it's oftentimes we see so many parents get involved in a child's life and try to force them into a certain direction. And oftentimes that has to deal with their own insecurities or maybe fulfilling something that they didn't get as a child. But it sounds like your mom was just like purely just whatever you wanted to do. It's like, yeah, go do that. Like when you came back home and you're like, yeah, I want to do this. And she's like, all right, quit tomorrow, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, and the thing is, so what's interesting about my mom is I was a competitive baseball player, too, growing up. Now, my mom didn't let me quit anything.
Did you have brothers or anything?
So, no. Well, so that's the thing. My folks are split, and I was an only child until, like, 7, which is really weird whenever you're a spoiled brat until you're 7. And then all of a sudden you get more kids in the mix. But I'm my mother's only biological child.
Gotcha, okay.
And then my father has 2 more, and then I've got a stepbrother, stepsister, and then an adopted brother.
Wow, okay.
So, like, there's a lot going
Goes from
on.
1 to 4.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So, you know, but I still got that, you know, I got the only child long enough to be spoiled and get whatever I wanted. So I think that helps too. You know, like, you know, you need to have a brief period of your life where you get whatever you want so you can kind of taste that and you can chase it.
Yeah.
You know? So, but yeah, I don't know where I was going with that.
We're just talking about specifically, and I just wanted to know the context of, you know, growing up with brothers and understanding family dynamics is really important. But
Yeah.
I think we're talking about just your mom being super supportive and not like forcing you down a certain path, but just truly being down for whatever you wanted to do. Like
that is a dreamer, you know, because like if I would have brought that idea to like my parents at that time, they would have been like, I would have gotten the opposite response, probably. You're throwing it all away. This is irresponsible. Like that whole thing, right? And so that really, to me, is amazing evidence. Just this picture of your mom. It's like she's been like watching you, waiting, like rubbing her hands together, and then you found jiu-jitsu, and she's like, "Yep, there it is. Go."
Yeah, because everybody else.
All the while, I mean, you've invested in like being a machinist and everything else, like a legitimate career. So
yeah,
I think that's cool, man.
And it's so cool watching like. I know Miles' mom pretty well now, and when she comes and watches him compete, she's just like, she's so giddy and so excited.
Oh, she's my biggest fan.
Oh yeah, it's really cool, man.
It's a great Backstreet Boys song right there. Mom, you always were.
Is that a real fan? Is that a real song?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know.
Backstreet Boys, y'all. Come on.
That's amazing.
No shame in that game.
No, dude. I almost sang "I Want It That Way" at karaoke the other night, but I chose Unchained Melody instead.
It's always a crowd pleaser.
Yeah.
I usually warm up with Sublime What I Got.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's usually a good one.
Yeah.
And then I'll usually wild card the next one.
Love that.
So you're married now. How long you been married?
Since August. What is that, like 9 months?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fresh.
Yeah, it's fresh.
Marriage. And so tell me a little bit about, do you see yourself as a romantic? Do you see yourself like tell me a little bit about how you approach romance and why her and why now?
Well, so my wife and I have known each other for we were really good friends for about 7 years. And my wife actually worked with my mother for quite a long time. And so what's funny is she's always been by my side through this whole thing.
Oh, wow.
And it was kind of one of those things where, I always thought she was hot and had a crush on her, but, she was like living in West Tennessee, and I was like, okay, I'm doing my thing up here, blah, blah, blah. And so, she's flown all over the world with me, like just as a friend. And like, there's been there was no rufflings of anything, but she was just right there the whole time. And then I just kind of woke up one day and I was like, oh shit.
It wasn't when you got your black belt. She's like, all right, got it.
Yeah.
No,
he passed the test.
Oh no. And it's
how cool, man. So you got such a familiarity with her. Like, y'all started with friendship.
Yeah, we started with friendship, and that's why we got married in 6 months.
Right.
Yeah.
Like we got married really quick, and I'm 30, she's 32, and we knew from the get-go whenever we started dating seriously that it's like, yeah, we're just going to do it. It's like,
love that.
Yeah, we're just jumping right in. I don't really half-ass anything, and she doesn't either, which I respect. Yeah. And so, yeah, we just jumped right in and did it. So, and it's been great. So, and I think another thing that's kind of missing too in that context is I think we talk about that path of, suffering or mainly self-introspection. And I think that's where a lot of people miss the boat. And it's hard for some people whenever you take two people who don't know themselves very well and then they get married and then they go through that path together, a lot of times they grow apart because they realize they're different people. And I was very fortunate that her and myself had gotten to this point in life where we were cool with not ever being with anybody. Yeah. And we knew ourselves, we were very grounded in ourselves, and then, to me that has made the marriage really easy.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people miss that boat.
So who are you? What do you want? Where are you going? Where do you see yourself going now? Like, what's your horizon now? I heard a little bit about the blank canvas and owning a gym, and
yeah,
so maybe that's it. But I was just curious to know, as you look off to the horizon and the sun's rising, what do you see like 10 years down the road? What would you like to be there?
The ability to keep going. It's really interesting because I've kind of, for myself, as I've reached this almost 10-year goal, with having the school and this place, and really I'm hoping that, through this, there's a lot of, with coaching, it's really, really interesting because it can take a lot out of you. We talk about those people that come in and they leave, Well, that happens, even at like year 5, year 6. And I hope that I can continue to carry on the same charisma and enthusiasm in like year 10 when the new guy or the new girl comes in, or like the new kid comes in that's, that needs help. And I still have that output for them to be there as their coach and help them walk through whatever valley they're walking through if they need help with it. I hope I can still be that, because for me, and we talk about the competitive aspirations and all of that stuff, and at the end of the day, I'm here for the students, and that's my overall goal, is to be able to be that person for them that helps them that's already walked through some of that life, but as far as, I guess, business and just overall goals is, I'm doing what I want to do. I don't, I hope I can still do what I'm doing.
Just more of the same.
Just more of
that's success to me.
The dream, man.
Yeah.
There's no striving in that. There's, you've already accomplished. How old are you now?
30.
So you've accomplished by 30, like a lifelong goal for a lot of people, I would think, like black belt. Mm-hmm. And so, that's a mountain to climb, and so you've climbed it. And so to me, that's what embodied peace is that now that you're here, it's not like the adventure stops, but it's like, now I can have the adventure in this where I am.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And not have that, not being too content.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, never having arrived, right?
Yeah.
Always on to the next thing, and it seems to be an obvious part of your personality is there's always a part of you in the workshop working on something, banging away at something, it seems.
Always.
Literally, too. He's always like fixing something around here.
Well, a machinist, right?
Yeah.
I mean, really good with your hands. And all right, I got a question for you. So where do you draw inspiration? Books, podcasts, what kinds of things tickle your fancy? Like what would you, what's kind of lighting you up? Either historically, like a book that's always been, this is one of Tim Ferriss's questions you always ask people, like what's the book that you would gift most often? Or if there was like one book that you've carried along the way, or maybe just a recent thing that's been kind of tickling your fancy. I'm just curious about that.
One thing that did it for a long time was Mastery by Robert Greene. I really enjoyed that book. That kind of set me on, it taught me how to be an apprentice, and how to learn from a mentor. And I think that's a part of just that whole process, which is another thing that has been lost, is that apprenticeship, being led and not being a leader. Like, you got to know how to follow before you can lead.
That's so good, man. That's so good.
So, that was a big one for me.
Mastery by Robert Greene.
Yep.
I'll have to look that up.
I've heard good things about that book. That's next on my reading list, actually.
Yeah, it's really good, and it goes through all the different stages of mastery, like all the way from like finding a mentor all the way to leaving them.
Oh, dude, that sounds like a great book. That's cool.
Yeah, and it's like a step-by-step playbook, and throughout my career, I would go into that book, and it's of course broke down in chapters and all that stuff, but at every point, whenever I would read the book, I would get to a point in the book where it's like, oh, I'm not quite here yet. I need to stop reading.
Yeah.
And so it's a book that you kind of, you revisit once a year maybe.
Yeah.
And you kind of dig a little deeper in it and see if you're in that next phase yet.
Powerful.
So he was talking a little bit about long term, like 10 years.
Yeah.
I want to take that even further out. Because I've been thinking about like legacy, and we've talked about this before about death, but I recently lost my grandfather last week. And so I just came back from his funeral yesterday. So dealing with, compartmentalizing all these feelings and, legacy and literally coming from hearing about the person that he was and the life that he lived and what people knew him for. That's on my mind lately. So what do you want people saying at your funeral?
Oh, I don't know.
That's a great question, Jake.
That is a really, really good question.
I think I could start for you, even just getting to know you over the past, year and then hearing your story. I think you want to be a place for people like yourself when you were 20. I think you want to be a safe haven for people.
Yeah. Even more so, I would say at my funeral, it doesn't go along the lines of what people would say about me, is that I hope that whenever I do pass on, that when everybody comes to the funeral, it's like a family reunion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's not more so, I hope my funeral's not about my death.
Mm.
Yeah.
I hope it's about everybody that comes to the funeral. That somehow I helped them in some way, or I gave them some avenue to find some really unique way of being, or like the irrational, whatever. Just pull it out of the hat. Like whatever it is that they needed at that point in their life. I hope that even if I could not physically help them or emotionally help them, I hope that something I did in the world provided them an opportunity to figure it out. Mm-hmm. So I guess as far as legacy goes, that's what I would hope at my funeral.
Yeah, man.
It's good.
So
there's a nice little brushstroke of your character is, I want my funeral not to be about my death. I want it to be about the people in my life's life.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
That's cool.
Yeah. Good question, Jake.
That's a great question.
Thank you.
I wanted to touch on a couple things that you were talking about here a few minutes ago. And you were talking about when people leave, right? Mm-hmm. In the sense like when you feel like let's take those people that have been in jiu-jitsu for 7-8 years and they get to a certain place and it's like they're right on the cusp, right at the verge. What causes those people to give it up? Like let's say someone gets to brown belt and they're like, and then they're just like, I'm done?
Man, there's a lot of factors. It could be health, a lot of it at that upper is health, and this ability how can I explain it? There's a lot of people that make it really high up, especially the middle-aged class, that, they have an unrealistic view of themselves. Like they're 40 years old, but they pit themselves against the 25-year-old athlete that just got out of college playing whatever football or something. So
Or wrestling at Fresno State.
Yeah, exactly, And I think that along the way is you never stop that development. You cannot stop the introspection, And even if you so badly want to be the 25-year-old athlete, you got to have that understanding and that poise to say, nope, I'm 40, and my body won't allow me to do this. And so I think at the upper levels, at the upper belts, that's why people quit. So, but now with other people who haven't been training as long, it's a plethora of things. Like maybe they're just not in a point in their life where they can suffer that much, and it's really unique because you have to find the value within yourself for this sport.
Yeah, I feel like if you don't get bit by the sport, I think catch the bug, it's a terrible idea. You know what I mean? Like it's just painful forever. So if you don't have that passion for it seems to be like one of those things that it's like if you don't have the passion for it, you can keep showing up, but it's probably not going to be enjoyable.
No, you got to enjoy the process, and
more than just going to a gym and working out.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Like it's gonna poke your buttons.
Oh, 100%. It's gonna, all this, whatever, you can be the machoest guy in the world, and you come in here and you get some like little nerdy kid roll you up and choke you half to death. You got a lot of confronting to do at that moment.
Oh yeah.
Because realizing, and one of the major, and Professor Jarrett, my coach, talked about this a long time. I forgot what seminar he was at, but I want to say this was in the early 2000s, and it was great, and it all just made sense. But this guy, he was like, what the difference between us and them is, and he was pointing outside the window, and everybody just had no idea. He was like, we know we're weak. That's why we're here. They don't know they're weak. So a lot of times whenever people come in, I remember when I started, I had been in a couple of fist fights and gotten my face drug across concrete and hit with a crowbar. I thought I was pretty tough. And then I come in a jiu-jitsu gym and it's like, oh man, no. There's nothing I can do. This guy's like, it looks like he's humping my leg, but my knee hurts, so like you have to tap or my knee's going to blow out. There's just all kinds of things that can happen. So you notice that confrontation starts day one.
Oh, yeah.
With yourself.
I talked about this last week, but Ruby, my first class, she's a 105-pound girl, took my back and choked me out twice. So it wasn't a fluke the first time. And at the time I was 290 and I'd been lifting heavy weight for 10 years. So I came in thinking I was pretty tough, and I realized I was not competent. And the reality is, like, we had this kid come in, I say kid, he's probably 23 here about 6 months ago. And you could tell this kid kind of probably had gotten everything his whole life, everything given to him. And he was so shocked. You remember this? You remember this guy?
Oh, yeah.
He was so shocked that he could not beat me. He was absolutely shocked when he tried to submit me in my own guard and I took his back. And he's like, but I saw this on YouTube. Why didn't it work? And it's like, because I've put in 5,000 hours of mat time leading up to this, And so the thing is that people that don't ever confront the truth about themselves in this way, and it doesn't have to be jiu-jitsu. It's a very powerful mechanism. I think almost everyone can get something out of jiu-jitsu, but it doesn't have to be that. But if you don't realistically take a look at yourself and work to become competent and sacrifice for that, you're going to always have an unrealistic expectation or view of yourself. And when push comes to shove and you do have to meet the challenge at the door, you're not going to be able to if you haven't done it. And I'm not just talking about physical. I'm also talking about just like the mental challenges that come your way. The thing about jiu-jitsu that's so powerful, or one of the many things for me, is the stress inoculation. In the sense, like, when I'm in a situation now where 3 years ago I would have freaked out or like had this weird adrenaline rush. I had this guy in a Kroger parking lot the other week try to run me over and then get out of his car, and I just kind of stood there calmly, and he backed off. And I remember in that moment I had this like almost like everything went just like I was ready. There was no like heart rate racing. I was just ready to go.
You didn't like rip your shirt off?
Exactly. Yeah. It was just calm. And I think he saw that and he got back in his car and drove away. Because most people, they escalate, and it's a physical response. In that I was able to keep calm. And before jiu-jitsu, that wouldn't have been the case. And so I just think it's really interesting that how you talked about this earlier, how what you work on here translates to out there. The choosing the suffering here, or in whatever avenue anyone who's watching here chooses to do something difficult that pushes them. As they get better at handling that, they get better at handling the stuff that's the externalities as well, that kind of infiltrate your life on a daily basis. And so that's one of the other things I find really powerful. I want to talk about sacrifice, because I think it goes. I actually was telling you this story, but we didn't go in the weeds about it. I was in preparing to watch The Northman this weekend. I was going back and listening to some Norse mythology, some Viking mythology.
What's Northman?
It's this new Viking movie coming out.
What?
Comes out today. Actually, we're going to go see it today. And it looks incredible. So,
sweet. There are very few things that are cooler than the Vikings.
It's very true.
To be honest.
Very true.
The Berserkers. Like,
bro, we were talking about them. I was like, I hope they have Berserkers in this movie.
I mean, how terrifying, right? If you're one of those guys in England with like the bald spot that's on purpose.
Oh, I know.
And you saw these guys like shroomed out, probably half drunk, still haven't slept the night before, just going crazy and running at you naked.
Yeah.
Like
wielding double axes. Just
I mean,
like,
that's...
Yeah.
What a way to go out.
Oh, yeah,
wow.
man. Dude, well, you have in that warrior culture, they believed that you did not make it to Valhalla unless you died fighting. So these people, they were trained to die in violent ways, and they relished in it. I'm not saying that's the best way to live your life, but it's still pretty cool.
And they ran into that battle totally hallucinating.
Oh yeah.
Like how? Like what? Talk about like an intense, crazy experice.
Oh man.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I wonder how much
moly.
friendly fire there was just because they're stripped out of their
There's
mind.
just a guy hacking a tree.
But so I was looking at because I think this ties into jiu-jitsu in a lot of ways we're talking about, and sacrifice. And we've talked about this a lot on our podcast. You know, the whole idea of sacrifice can be, it seems counterintuitive and ridiculous sometimes, because especially in a culture where we want everything now, where everything's available at our fingertips whenever we need it. All the information of humanity is available with 1 or 2 clicks of a button. And virality, even on social media, how overnight you can become a sensation, right? Without the work ethic to really fuel that in a way that's healthy. But I was looking up at this Norse mythology, and it was the story of how Odin lost his eye. And so I find, anyone who's listened to the podcast knows that we find mythology very fascinating. We talk about it a lot. But this is one of my favorite stories I've heard in a long time. And I'm going to try and remember the details, and then I want to get y'all's opinion here. So Odin was the king of the gods, right? Asgard was the realm of the gods, and it was separated from our world via the Bifrost Bridge, I think is what it's called. But the enemies of the gods were the giants. So Thor, Odin, Loki, all those guys, their enemies were these giants that lived in the realm of the giants. And Odin becomes the king of the gods, and he realizes, I don't know enough to be a leader. He's like, I'm not wise enough to be a leader, which I think is a fascinating first step of a story about the king of the gods. And so he knows that he has to go to the giants' realm, because in the land of his enemies is the well of knowledge and wisdom.
That's right.
And so he has an uncle who lives in the land of the giants' name. I think his name was like Ymir. And Ymir lives by this well. And so Odin goes into the enemy's camp, finds the well of knowledge, talks to his uncle, and the well is growing underneath Yggdrasil, which is the tree of life in Norse mythology. So once again, you have these sort of parallels between all these different stories that are fascinating. But so the well is blossoming up underneath the tree of life. And his uncle says, just because you're my blood doesn't mean that you've earned the right to drink from this well. He said, it's going to cost you something. And it's going to cost you more than it might be worth to drink from the well. And Odin's like, tell me what it is. I'll give anything to become wise, which I think is fascinating. I'll do anything to become wise. And Ymir says, all right, pluck out your eye and throw it in the well. And so Odin...
Can you imagine plucking out your own eye?
No.
Dude, that's
a moment.
Oh, yeah.
That's a moment of like, let's do this.
Yeah. And he says, okay. And so he takes his dagger, plucks out his eye, throws it in the well. And in the story, it says that the whole universe heard his screams of agony. So this was like, the pain was more than he could bear, almost. And he threw the eye in the well. And then Ymir gives him this horn from which he can drink from the water. And he starts throwing it back, this water of wisdom that makes him wise. And then, obviously, he's in pain. But over the next few weeks, he begins to realize that he can see better with one eye than with two. And I wonder, when I was just listening to the story, and I didn't look up any motifs or people analyzing the story, but what it came down to me for was sacrifice, right? The insanity of plucking out your own eye for the sake of wisdom, but it becoming worth it in the end. Like it actually paid off the way a sacrifice should, and that he can see better with the one eye than the two. I feel that same way. It sounds weird, but in jiu-jitsu, getting on the mats, being uncomfortable, being suffering, is all it's throwing that eye in the well, hoping that you get a clearer vision of yourself and of the world at the end of it. And when you do begin to see yourself for who you are, honestly, and you can be honest with yourself about where you're weak and where you struggle and what is necessary for you to continue to move forward, all the suffering that you endured becomes worth it. It's like planting. It's like planting a tree. I could eat the pecan, or I could plant it and get 50,000 pecans, in years and years and years and years. It's not an immediate thing. It's about delayed gratification. And I just think there's something really powerful in that story that can be applied to our own life. What are you willing to give up for wisdom? What are you willing to sacrifice to know yourself and see yourself for who you are? Most people never face themselves. Most people never slow down enough or challenge themselves enough to see who they are when things get tough.
And the fact that his story started with the realization that humility, that he needed more. He didn't have it all figured out. Mm-hmm. That is like the difference in jiu-jitsu, is the person who's going to like leave after a few classes, is if they get their teeth kicked in and they're like, okay, I don't know anything. Like even after just doing it, for around a year, I realized that just after a year, it gave me the ability to not even hardly develop a game, but just to know that how much I don't know. Just after a year of doing it, that's what I got out of it. It's like, okay, I see the breadth of how deep this game is. And for me, it's like, I'm not going to be the best athlete. I'm not going to be the best this or that. So I came in and I was like, I'll try to be the best student. I'll try to be the best listener and control what you can control, and I think that's beautiful. And jiu-jitsu is so rich in the symbolism. But I think that's such a beautiful thing to have in life, is recognize you don't have it all figured out.
Right.
Be interested, engaged, and open to listen. Ask questions and find mentorship.
Curiosity, man.
Yeah,
you talk about this all the time. Curiosity. In jiu-jitsu, if you're not curious, you're never going to grow. You have to obviously learn what your coaches are teaching you, but you're also on your own journey, And part of that is like experimenting with new positions, And that's life as well, you know? And I think it's fascinating, you know, that the well of knowledge, the well of wisdom for Odin was not in his backyard. It was where the darkness was.
That the tree of life sprung out from the well of wisdom. That is
cool,
beautiful.
right? Yeah.
I mean, that's a Joseph Campbell motif, that inside the cave you fear is the treasure you seek. And so going back to your idea of sacrifice, which, by the way, I'm sitting on this joke because you said 50,000 pecans. Dude, that's nuts. I could not say that. But anyway, dude, sacrifice. We talked on the last podcast this idea of, if you don't, like, as a child, you are instructed ideally by loving and wise discipline of the parents. And as an adult, we don't have parents anymore, and so not in that way. So the adult that doesn't discipline himself, life will punish. And so we've talked about this idea of, like, choose your sacrifice, like, choose it, because it's you're going to pay it either way. And it's better to choose it and pay it yourself. It's better to pluck out your own eye, right? So we've talked about that idea of, if you don't have to sacrifice for your dream, it's probably not a dream. You know what I mean? It might be a wish. It might be something that you, like, warm yourself by, like a fantasy. But if you don't have to put any skin in the game or engage a certain amount of chosen pain, it's probably not a dream. It's probably not a dream. But I think about the people that become celebrities, or, like, you know, America's dreamers, right? I mean, they're just kind of Instagram people, you know, that maybe they can sing, or maybe they're a model or something, or an actor. But the ones that just kind of, like, to your point, Spencer, that just kind of ride that algorithm up to a viral experience, not knowing each individual case. There's some people, my point is, there's some people that find themselves into this dream experience, but they haven't sacrificed for it. And people like that tend to, as far as what happens to character, people that don't sacrifice but experience the fruit end up getting hurt, you know, getting hurt bad. This makes me think about one of the things I've learned from Jonathan Pageau, when he talked about in the story of Genesis, how the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it wasn't like that was bad fruit. It was good fruit. It's the knowledge of good and evil. And it was in the twisting manipulation of the temptation that coerced first Eve and then Adam to eat of the fruit too early. Basically, that was good fruit. That's the fruit that's in heaven. I could be butchering this, but I think this is right.
I like it, though. Keep
this
going.
is the fruit that's in the tree of life in heaven, maybe, but like, we are meant to eat it. But they were way too young and naive to eat that knowledge, and so it hurt them. And I think there's an interesting concept to that.
Oh, yeah.
Around choosing your sacrifice and making sure that, you know, count your costs, you know, before you eat that thing.
Ill-gotten gains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting, because I've seen it a lot, and I think it falls into the get-rich-quick category. But a lot of people don't put in the adequate amount of time, right? They put in 3 or 4 years, and then they're like, I'm ready. And it's like, no. You still have a few years before you can go out and lead or whatever, right? It's kind of like Odin. And and I think whenever you get to that point, and I've said it for several years, is if you want something bad enough, nothing's a sacrifice. And that's why Odin just, boop, pop.
He's like, I'll do anything for this.
I'll do anything. Yep. And then he does it, and he realizes the suffering. And then it's like the suffering that's just part of it. You know, and you kind of get used to it. You get numb to the suffering.
And it's a temporary physical white hot pain, but he was already suffering in a greater way, right? Wasn't he?
Yeah.
Like, feeling the burden of leadership, but not knowing if he had
good.
the goods. You know
That's
what I mean?
good.
So it's short term, long term. Like, choose your suffering. And I would recommend, this is the root of discipline, is choose, you know, take the suffering in the short term. That makes the long term a little bit easier. Pluck the eye out. In the long term, it's actually pleasurable, probably.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much to that story. I'm glad y'all found it interesting too, because I mean, that I love that he said, you know, the treasure you most desire is in the cave you most fear, right? Is that basically what?
Inside the cave you fear is the treasure you seek, and this is the archetype of the dragon from medieval times that sleeps on the hoard of gold, the treasure in the cave. And the dragon, the character of the dragon, goes out and steals treasures. He steals things that people love, and he brings them and hoards them. But he doesn't need them. It makes him fall asleep. He just falls asleep on the pile. And then of course it's the knight in shining armor that has to come and face the dragon to get to the treasure. So you had to confront the dragon. There's a great. It's kind of pop and a little cheesy, but there is I think it's called Joseph Campbell or Hero. Or anyway, I'll have to find it and we'll put the link in. But there's a really short video on YouTube going over some of the Joseph Campbell stuff, and it's this idea of encountering the dragon, who, spoiler alert, is you.
Yep.
It's your biggest fear, which has something to do with you. So my question for you, if you're open, this is you don't have to answer this question. It could be vulnerable, but what is your biggest fear
right now?
Yeah.
Not being able to find harmony. Because, I think Jeremy and I were talking about this the other day, but it was about, this balance that everybody's looking for in life. Like, we've basically boiled down to balance is bullshit. There's no such thing. It's the harmonious structure in which your life is created, right? Because something's always going to fall through the cracks, right? But I think if you don't find harmony in your life, then everything's going to suffer equally, and it will continue to spiral, So I think you have to stay in check with everything, I've got to stay in check, with the kid who doesn't want to come to class, and like, what's the cause of that? And then I got to check in with my wife, and it's like this whole unique harmony that you have to find. You have to find it daily, and I've been toying around with this model of living that I've actually really come to enjoy. It's a little overwhelming at first, but you know how typical, kind of like the way our life is structured is you have your work life, you have your home life, you have your boys' life, you have your whatever life, and you're running like 5 different algorithms at once, and you have to go in and out of modes of being all the time. And I do think that's important for a certain, in a certain context, right? But what I've been trying to do is make my life whole. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if something happens at the gym, it can't overpower everything else. Yeah. And to me, it goes back to the management piece, right? You can't allow one mess up in your life to overrun your entire life. So I think once you get to a place of where you understand yourself, you understand your life, you understand where you're going, everybody's understanding is going to be different at that point about themselves. But if you let something overrun something while your life as a whole, your whole life will crumble and fall apart. So I really enjoy doing this, but I enjoy obstacles, right? Even if I put them there. Now, I don't put the big ones in front of me anymore because that gets really toxic. But, even whenever I was learning how to shoot a bow and arrow, is I would set up 2 metal chairs or whatever that I had to shoot through. Just so I had to have that pressure. It's like, okay, you're going to lose $15 if you don't hit this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think if you can develop that ability to go around the obstacles, or at least see them for what they are as you're approaching them, you can have that harmonious lifestyle. But you need to learn how to manage everything else first before you do that. So, because I don't think that's for everybody.
I appreciate what you said about balance is kind of bullshit, because it's an interesting conversation. My brother told me that one time years ago. He was like, because I was trying to sort through, and I was trying to get really into like the Zen thing and like the harmonious balance of my life and you being in the flow, and then you don't have to strive when you're in the flow. And there is something to that. There's definitely something beautiful, but the fallacy in it is thinking that once you find that, you can just stay there.
Right.
And because that's not how the world operates. And I remember my brother told me once, he's like, Brent, where in the Bible does it say to have balance? And it was an interesting challenge, because I think the Bible does talk about balance and stuff like that, and in a certain way. But balance isn't like so much. I mean, I guess there's a balance and an equilibrium in nature, but it's not balanced, right? Necessarily. Like some seasons last longer than others and things like that, and the climate's always changing and stuff like that. But balance is not like staying perfectly upright and not tilting, because life tilts. Even the earth itself is tilted and spinning around and everything. So to me, balance is more about, like, I love the word harmony that you used, because to me, balance is about how everything can belong. Everything's cohesive. So maybe over here, there's a mountain I'm climbing that's requiring some striving. Maybe over here, this is like a little Zen garden I've got. And this is what I think we've talked about this on the podcast, but the idea of shalom. And I learned this from the Bible Project, that shalom means like the greeting, the Hebrew greeting, which means peace. But as they define it, peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's where everything belongs. It's like, excuse me, like the arms of the Father just gathering everything together. And so you got this little part over here, you got this little part over here, and maybe there's some conflict in all of that. But the peace is the shalom, is like, hey, this all belongs here. So I think about that a lot.
I wanted to, you mentioned archery, because this just is another cool, one of the things I really respect about Miles, and he's talking about obstacles. And do you mind talking about why you got into archery?
No.
Okay.
So, well, December 2019? 2018? No, it was 2019. So I had a complete hip reconstruction surgery. Another one of those weird things that pulls your life out from under the rug, right? Didn't know if I'd ever be able to train again. Definitely didn't think I was ever going to be able to compete again. So basically during that period of time, my whole life just kind of got ripped out from under me, which has happened before. So it wasn't like this new thing where, but it is what it is. And so, what was interesting is I had come to terms with it. Jiu-Jitsu gave me what it needed to give me. And it actually, oddly enough, in that moment, I didn't care if I could do Jiu-Jitsu again, because it had given me all these factors to manage my life, right? So I was like, okay, I took all it would let me take, and I'm just going to run with that with the rest of my life. So it wasn't like this whole like depressive, manic state of like, oh, what am I going to do with my life? But needless to say, all that was aimed right at archery. All that energy, because I couldn't walk really. I was on crutches for a while, and I couldn't do anything active. And so I basically, and at that point in time, I was living in the mezzanine of a warehouse. I had moved out of the closet and was living at work at that point. The reason why, because they had AC, and it was great.
Big time.
But there was like this archery lane out there, and they allowed me to shoot or whatever. And it had gotten to where that's what I was doing. I was shooting, morning, noon, night. Every time I had a break, I was outside shooting. And what's interesting is whenever you go through the steps of truly honing in and learning a craft, no matter what that craft is the fundamentals don't change across life. And there it was. It was like I fundamentally knew how to learn something. So I just did that with archery. And so you can find that mastery piece and that itch, to learn something new. Once you learn how to master something, it gives you more confidence going into the next thing. Because it's like, okay, this sucks. I'm not going to be able to hit the bullseye today. I need to work on my stance today. Then the next day you need to work on your anchor spot. Or the next week you need to just work on anchoring. You don't even have to worry about hitting the bullseye. And then you go through, and John Dudley, who's the guy, he's the school of knock on,
yeah.
And I just basically did his course. And that's what I do every year. I do his course every year. And just, and then all of a sudden I can hit the bullseye 70, yards or whatever.
Jeez.
So
I just love that you took the obstacle that was preventing you from doing the thing that you had been doing. And you said, okay, I have this leftover energy now, and I know there's still work to be done. So I'm going to focus it here while I can't do this. And I think it's hilarious that it's archery.
Yeah.
It's about accuracy and about precision and about aiming at something. It's like literally direction. Where are you going? I'm putting this arrow right here. I'm going to try and Robin Hood one, you know, which you've done, right? Have you Robin Hooded one?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where you hit the arrow.
Yep.
And it splits the arrow in two.
Yep. Which I think is just the coolest thing. And that's
He split Robin's arrow in twine.
I just think that there's, once again, you know, life mirrors symbol. I mean, there's just symbolism in everything in life. And I think it's crazy and really cool that you chose archery during that and that you actually got really good at it. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just wanted you to tell that story because it's kind of, I think, once again, speaks to your character and your drive to become better and better at everything you do.
Yeah, there's this point where you get in life whenever you learn about yourself, you go down this road of mastery, whether you master it or not, and you just get addicted to progress.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
It's like learning to master mastery itself.
Yeah, that's what it boils down to. That's a great way of
whatever the thing is.
Yeah, whatever it is. And so during that period of my life it was really hard. I mean, obviously it was really hard, you know, like it sucked. Like that sucked. But I mean, it's like whatever. But a part of the archery piece is I was in purgatory. And if you look at different timelines of life, and you'll notice that kind of like right before you find the treasure in the cave, right? Well, there's a period of that cave where the lights are off. You can't see anything, and you are just there. And you can fumble around, and you have no idea when you're going to get there. It's almost like before you get the treasure, it forces you to release all control. And so a part of that archery piece during that time for me was I had no idea what I was going to do, but I had to find something that I could anchor myself to. Mm-hmm. Like I had the direction piece. I really needed direction. I needed some new thing to like obsess about because I was working in a warehouse packing boxes. You can imagine how just, you know, man, it sucks.
Monotonous.
Oh yeah, you know, and like there's no growth, and then like your whole day is trying to disconnect from what you're doing because of how boring it is. Like I can pack a box in so many different ways.
I believe it.
You know, and so it helped with that piece of having like a really monotonous job that I couldn't stand, and then but it also, you know, it's curbed that itch that I needed.
What I love about that, to your point, Spencer, is just, that was my favorite part too, is because I'm looking at it as your character in your story, and you're climbing this mountain to mastery in jiu-jitsu, and then your hip blows out. And so it's a total wipe the board clean moment. And I'm interested in those moments, like to see who you are. And what I notice in you is that you didn't pout and moan and slip into self-pity, which is so easy to do. You gave yourself a task, and I just love the part that tickles me the most is just the metaphor of what archery is. It's a total metaphor about attention and focus and precision and aim. And so one of the things that made me think of is something I just learned about focus. So I learned yesterday actually that the root word of focus in Latin is the same as hearth. And so the hearth of a home is like the fireplace, kind of usually it would be like normally in the kitchen or something like that. But it's where the food's made. It's where the house is warmed, where the family is nourished. And it's also where the altar is and the sacrifices are made to the gods and things like that. And so I just thought that was so interesting that focus in Latin means hearth, which is about feeding the children and making sacrifices.
And light
to God
and warmth. Yeah. And it's like there's just so many. That's so cool.
I don't know where to go with that, but it was just one of those things. I'm like, God, that's a cool thought.
That is a cool thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess if you distill it down, I mean, it's like that's where you're the most comfortable, you know, in your home or whatever. And I think it parlays into everything else in life. Like wherever your focus is, like that's your anchor. That's where you find your place. That's where you can be vulnerable. That's where you can eat.
And the hearth is the anchor of the home. And yeah, it cooks the food and it requires sacrifice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You got to feed it. But
That's cool.
I thought that was interesting. So here we are at Podcast for Dreamers. How are we doing on time, Jake?
We're getting there. We're at 124.
I don't want to totally rip off Tim Ferriss, but he's got this. Until I can figure out better language and a way to make it like a unique or something. He's got this question he'll often ask guests, and of course we mimic to learn. So to make it original, and the question that he has is, if you could buy a billboard somewhere in town that everybody sees.
We did that first.
Yeah, we've done that.
We already did that one.
Oh no. I'm saying
have a billboard.
We had a billboard here.
Oh, really? Perfectus does.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. I was like, is my memory that bad? We already talked about it. Sometimes it is, but
It was inside. It's a funny story.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I guess the point is, if you could buy a billboard somewhere in town that everybody would see, and you could write something on it or put a picture on it or whatever, like what would you put on it?
Personally, it couldn't be a Profectus logo. Or come join a class.
Yeah. Come choke your friends.
Ours said choke your friends.
Yeah.
That's good.
Oh, what would it? I don't know. I'm not a big motivational quote person. Let's see.
And it doesn't have to be motivational. Just
Yeah.
what would you want people to see or hear or read just on their way to work?
It's gonna be okay.
Yeah. How do you know that?
Just always is.
Yeah.
It is for me. I'm only speaking from my own life experience. I mean, even if you die, life's over. There's no more suffering. So, that's the end all be all. So, like, even if your life is shit, whenever you pass on, no, it's over. Yeah.
It's going to be okay. So even in that moment when you blew out your hip, even in that moment, it's going to be okay.
It has to be.
Even if it doesn't feel like it's okay. Because I think that's a very important mark of a master. That can live in the context of, even though it's going to shit right now, in the same breath, it's all okay. This is okay. We're okay.
Yeah, I think if you put
I know it hurts.
Oh, yeah.
I know you're confused. But the truth is that we are okay right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if you put yourself in a position to have life experience, which I don't think a lot of people do, I think you've learned that as you go. Like, my life has fallen apart probably 3 times, like really just fallen apart. And now I'm here on this podcast, and it's like, it's fine. I'm gonna, it's been a great day.
Yeah.
So far. So it's like, it's all about context and that self-narrative, that I think a lot of people are missing.
So maybe that's a good question to end on, is if you were to give advice to someone who is a young dreamer, like just all pure potential, doesn't have anything really solidified. They don't know what they want. They're just starting to go down paths that maybe people are suggesting, but they truly don't know what they want. What would you say to them? Or maybe for better context, what would you have said to you when you were 20? What advice would you give?
Let's go. I did it at 20, and it was find that peace, right? So, and I guess if you're thinking about from a context of somebody who doesn't know what their path is going to be, right? They don't know what their niche is, what their passion is. They have to relentlessly get out in the world and experience things. Like, you just have to. And whenever you find your craft, and that's a really interesting one, because I feel extremely fortunate that I've made that choice for myself whenever I was young. I didn't go through my entire 20s not understanding what I wanted. I knew from like 20 years old that I wanted to fight. and I feel very lucky in that regard. But for the people that are kind of wandering through life, I see it all the time. You see it in here too. It's like guys that are in their mid-20s. They're just kind of wandering through life. Actually, this is where I wanted to come to. They're wandering through life, and they don't have any commitment to anything. And a lot of people think it's like this perception of like, oh, I'm going to, go down this path, and then my passion and my career is just going to find me. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, that's bullshit. It's never going to find you. You have to choose it. Everything in life boils down to a choice. You can choose to have a career. You can choose to have self-introspection. You can choose to find like your little passion project. It all boils down to a choice. And I think the earlier somebody understands that their life is in their hands and that they have the power to choose a different life is when they're going to flourish.
Yeah. So gain context and commit yourself to something. Even if you don't think it is the thing, commit yourself to something.
Yep.
And you'll figure it out.
Yep. And one thing that you mentioned while you were telling your story too, that I might slide in there if I could, is don't lean too heavily on conventional wisdom or advice. Like you abandoned your career right when it was beginning, which was irrational from some perspectives.
It's plucking out the eye.
Irresponsible. Yeah. But from your perspective, it was a totally rational choice.
Yeah. No kids.
Right.
No significant other, nobody to take care of except for me. Yeah.
Could I, before we close out, could I ask you one more thing?
Yeah.
About coaching and I guess two things, coaching and competition. Mm-hmm. I've always enjoyed your take on competition, and it's specifically jiu-jitsu, obviously, because that's what we talk about. But in general, like choosing something like we're talking about, that choice, what did competition do for you, and what can it do for other people?
Well, you have to choose what you want it to do for you. I think that's important. Everything kind of goes back to that choice of life. For me, my competitiveness, I chose to let it help me manage myself under like extreme and utter stress while being extremely unconfident, right? So stepping into an arena where like if the gloves were off, whatever, and it's like they get behind you and choke you, like you're going to die. It's simulated murder, basically. But luckily, it's like referees and they're going to let go of you. But nonetheless, like your body doesn't know it. You go into fight, flight, or freeze. That's what you're fighting. And you learn a lot about yourself in those moments because, I think people think of all these emotional battles as like these like super complex algorithms, but there's only like 5 or 6 emotions or whatever. I don't know. You would know more than me. Like all the different ones. I don't know right off the top of my head, but that's what you're battling. Like those 5 or 6 core things, like your reptilian brain, that's it. Right. So, and that's what you're fighting everywhere all the time, depending on what your lifestyle is. So for me, that context of competing, it can do for you what you need it to do, and for me, it can also be an identity crusher, because you wrap yourself up in your passion. That's your identity. I remember for a certain period of time, it's like I wasn't Miles Kirby. I was jiu-jitsu. That's all I was. I was a competitor. That's it. That's all I was, because everything else I hated about myself. So I was this thing that was tangible that I did every weekend, right? And just like, it'll bite you. Jiu-jitsu's it's gonna whip you, and it's gonna give you lotion to put on your skin or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. I didn't really know what to say there.
No, that's good.
It's one of those things where, that context of it can be whatever you want it to be. But the competitive outlet, that truly gives you that piece to work towards, that really gives you that focus we talk about, because like you're going to, try to break somebody's arm, and they don't want you to. So you've got to put in a lot of work and dedication and a lot of focus, which will allow you to kind of disconnect from yourself and your problems for that brief moment, right? To help you gain that confidence that you need after the tournament to come back. And it's like, whether you won or lost, maybe you still had a great experience. So you come back with that confidence to whatever that piece in life you were working on, you have more confidence now to pack on top of that.
Right.
And,
Yeah, that was interesting. We talked about that question, who are you? You were talking about for a long time you weren't Miles Kirby, you were jiu-jitsu, because you were unhappy with everything else. Mm-hmm. So you wrapped yourself up in this, and you lived and died by your identity there, and that was the competitor in jiu-jitsu. And do you think now, as you've grown and now you're coaching these kids, and these kids adore this guy. Like, he's so good with these kids. He's creating a program of not just good jiu-jitsu players, but good kids. It's pretty cool. Mm. Do you find that question about who are you easier to answer now?
Oh, yeah, because, if I wrote it all out on a piece of paper, I would be a page full of things,
Yeah.
And I think with that context of, like, whenever somebody asks you who you are, it boils down to, hopefully it aligns with your, like, core values and fundamentals. Like, I'm a hard worker. I'm a loving person. I'm a caring person. Along those lines where it can be a little more vague. Mm-hmm. My definition of myself is way more vague now. There's not like these individual pieces that are really niche that I am anymore.
It's not just a list of adjectives. It's something different.
Yeah, for me, yeah. And, and it's funny you say that, like, with the kids, and what's funny with the kids and what's different about children, and how much time do we have?
We're good.
Okay.
Go.
With the children, you have to make suffering fun. Mm. And I don't ever tell them that they're suffering. Like, because they don't know what suffering is yet.
Right.
So, but it is funny watching them, because, and you have to make it where, like, the nicks and bruises are just, like, that's fine. Like, that's okay. Like, the kid who, like, his mother or father, like, every time they fall, they're like, oh, honey, you okay? You okay? Like, let me kiss it. It's, let me make it better or whatever. Instead of, like, just they fall and you just kind of step back and look and just see what they're going to do about it.
That's that moment.
Yeah. And I do that all the time with my kids, like, and I watch them get all, like, because they're also going through, like, emotional development, right? Yeah. Like, they're going through so many changes up top, and you get some kid in here that's, hyper competitive and just cries because he just wants to win. And then you watch him slowly understand, it's like, oh, it's not all about winning all the time. And, and that piece of every kid's going to lose. There's no getting out of it, But they're going to win too, sometimes, And I think if you can develop that piece of every time they come in here, they win. That's their first win.
Right.
Always. Yeah. But you have to, like with children, they have no context. Like, you have to put that in front of them all the time. It's like, you won, like, to me, and I tell my kids all the time, I had this big talk about it last week because they were pissing me off because they weren't paying attention and they weren't trying. And I don't have a lot of I only have one expectation for my kids' class, and that's that everybody puts forth effort. I don't care if you can do a cartwheel. I don't care if you can do the move or not. I don't care if you win. All I care about is that you try. Yeah. That's it. And I'm hoping that by me instilling that in them, that they will try in everything that they do, And luckily, I've got a good group of parents that they're pretty on board, and that's where and that's another thing that's been interesting too about coaching children and, just the different personality types of the children and the parents. And it's just like everything else. And you guys know, because you're in the mental health field, trying to get somebody to change who they are as an adult, it takes a long time for them to work through that. And it's less time with kids because of the context, and they're not just, like, rooted in their ways yet. They're still like the sponge, But a lot of parents don't understand that your child is not going to be disciplined. They're not going to be focused, and their life is not going to change in a week. And if you berate a kid, as soon as you bring them into anything, as soon as you decide you want your kid to be something different, if you berate them, they will never change, and they'll lose confidence, right?
They lock up.
Yeah, they lock up. It's water on rock. You have to slowly integrate changes. You have to slowly integrate effort and time and discipline. And there's all these factors. And, the pinnacle is discipline, basically. But there's so many different things that have to be in order before you develop discipline. And I think a lot of people miss that boat, too, just in life, that you can't just wake up with discipline. Yeah. You have to create it in several other avenues.
Discipline seems to be the mechanism of like unrealized potential, I guess. So do you feel like, and I guess this would be my last question, do you feel like who you are today, everything that you are and that you're embodying now, do you believe that it was in there from the beginning? It just had to be manifest through discipline and sacrifice? Or do you believe that who you were then was a totally different person and you've become something new?
I think the fundamentals have never changed. Like the core values, morals. I think all of those things have been there since early childhood development. Like, I was really lucky to have a great set of parents that, really nailed that in with me. But there's a point, you remember how I think it was earlier I was talking about how I think people jump in too early? Well, I'm going to go and tell you right now, dude, 2 years ago, there's no way I'd be coaching kids. There's no way. No way. And then I think it's another piece of throwing yourself in the fire. And it was one of those things where I didn't have the confidence to coach kids because I didn't feel like I was good enough to coach them. Like, I didn't feel like 5 years ago, there's no way I'd have coached a kid because, I was still going out drinking and partying and all that stuff. And it's like, that just doesn't sit right with me. And about a year and a half ago, a year and a half ago, I sat down and I was talking and I had been stewing on it for a while about, coaching kids and all this stuff. And I had to, and I asked myself, I was like, am I going to be the kids coach that tells them what to do? Am I going to be just like all the other adults and just lie to them and say, hey, don't do this, don't do that. Keep looking over there because I'm going to go over here and do everything I just told you not to do.
Right.
Or am I going to, be that person who, it's like, yeah, don't drink. Yeah, I can say that because I don't drink. Or, yes, but I do drink. Like, I have a drink socially with friends, like, maybe once a month. It's very, very rare. But that's kind of where I was. And whenever I made the choice to walk the walk that I was preaching, it gave me a lot of confidence. And I think that's honestly what gave me the power to teach kids.
Yeah. Integrity.
Yep.
Yeah.
What would you like to shamelessly plug here at the end?
Profectus Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah.
Look, you got your own water. You got your own water.
Yeah.
See
And
that?
look at this Yeti too.
Yeah.
Oh, you got your own
Yeah.
little tumbler.
Right here too.
Yeah.
I've got mine.
And and we might can stick this in front of the camera and they scan the QR
Oh,
code.
look at that. Scan that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So
In front of the camera. Where can people find Profectus and Profectus Jiu-Jitsu?
they
Right
can go,
here.
Yeah, right here where we're at currently. And they can also go to profectushq.com. And then there's like the list of all the locations and all that kind of jazz. So
yeah, maybe for those who don't know, explain what is Profectus, where is Profectus, where are we now, what is this gym? Just to get a little bit more context.
Yeah.
I don't think we did that at the beginning.
Yeah. So Profectus is we're in Middle Tennessee. We're about to have our 5th location here in the next month. We're right now in Columbia, Tennessee, and it's awesome. Love it. So if you're ever in the area or if you live here and you want to try some jiu-jitsu, swing by. We'd love to have you.
We'd love to see who you are.
Oh, yeah.
that's right.
Miles Kirby, thanks for being on today, man.
Yeah,
It
man.
was a
Yes,
blast.
thank you.
We appreciate you.
This has been awesome.
Our first guest.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
great.
big deal, man.
Yeah.
And and knocked it out of the park. Well played. So, Who are you?
What do you want?
Where are you going?
This is the 0400 podcast, the podcast for dreamers. Thanks for joining us, and
Keep dreaming.
Keep dreaming.